So hello, those of you who are watching from home and those of you who will watch later. Thank you so much for joining us this evening. This is the fifth in the Thursday Night Masterclass Series, and they've all been really cool, a good variety of topics. So thank you for tuning in. My name is Anne Howarth, and I am the French horn teacher here, as well as chamber music coach at Tufts. And we're going to talk tonight about crafting a multifaceted musical life. So for those of you students who are active Tufts students now, or those of you who are recent graduates, how can you organize your musical life the way you want to when you're done here? I just want to say that I'm speaking to a largely empty auditorium today, but I'm imagining all of you here. There are 300 seats in the Granoff Center and in Distler Hall, and 45 of them are able to be used right now, but all your faces are here at the moment with me. So, in addition to teaching horn here and coaching chamber music, I play a lot of chamber music. I play some orchestral music. I do some improvisation. I teach at other places. Like many of my colleagues, my career is varied and multifaceted, and it's kept me engaged and interested, and it's been really fun and really challenging. So I know it will be different for each of you. I know that there are some folks watching who have interest in performing your career, some folks who have interest in having a job that is not performing related, but keeping performance as your avocation, and some folks who have interest in kind of combining all the pieces of these, and it's all possible, though it is definitely some work. So there are some things that will be helpful to think about before you go out into the wide world and see what musical opportunities are there. And I'm hoping that this conversation this evening will help you think a little bit in advance about what some of those things might be. So a little bit more about me. I grew up in the Midwest. I did my undergraduate degrees at Oberlin College and Conservatory. So I have a Bachelor of Music degree in horn performance and a Bachelor of Arts degree in environmental studies. Which makes me feel like I have an awful lot in common with many of you folks who are students here. I'm sure that a lot of you came to school here because you can do music and other things too. You can explore your different interests and find ways to put all those things together. If you were here in person, I would ask you what your musical interests are: cello, jazz, bass, a cappella voice. And I would ask you what you might be interested in doing when you leave school, if you have any sense of that right now. And we would take that information and we would make it into a conversation for all of us together. But since we can't do that way, I'm just going to say some things to you. I'm going to talk a little bit and try to imagine what those conversations might be. So if you have questions along the way, unfortunately, there's no way for you to get them to me tonight, but you can send them to the music department office here at Tufts, and I'll be happy to answer them as they come in. So even if you're watching this at a later date, potential rebroadcast, you're still welcome to email or call the music department office, and they'll funnel things to me, and I'm happy to respond because I have a real passion for helping folks get connected to their musical goals, their dreams, the things that really fire them up and turn them on, and there's so many different options. So one thing to think about is specialization versus variety. So if you have a passion to do one particular thing, if you love the organ music of a particular Baroque composer that nobody's heard of, and that's the only thing that you love, then absolutely you should go after that. If the only thing that is going to make you musically happy is to play in an orchestra or be a violin soloist, then you should probably consider that as your musical avenue after school. I will say that the more you specialize, the more you can limit your opportunities, and that can get a little bit tricky. But if that is the one thing that is going to satisfy you musically, then that's where you should put your efforts, because this is all really about in what ways music is going to be rewarding to you as an individual. There are a lot of advantages to variety and to having a lot of musical variety in your life. So you might discover new interests, you might discover things that you never thought you would go after, but that really bring you joy. You might get to work with some really interesting people who have multiple ideas and things can cross-pollinate, which is really great. There's definitely more opportunities. So I would recommend to be open to things that cross your path and see where they might lead you. That said, you certainly can stick with one kind of option, but you don't have to pigeonhole yourself. So there's no reason you can't play or sing jazz and classical music. Or I have colleagues who play in orchestras at night and then after that go to salsa band rehearsals. So you don't have to feel like there's one path or there's one way to go about doing this. I don't know if any of you know Sarah Darling. She is a performer here in the Boston area. She's a violist and a Baroque violinist. She plays with a Far Cry, which is Boston's self-conducted orchestra, largely string orchestra. But she's also the concertmaster of the Harvard Baroque Chamber Orchestra. And her interests are so wide and so varied, and she shows up in so many different musical places. If you have time and interest, I would recommend going to the website for A Far Cry and looking at Sarah's bio. It's really elegantly written, it's really fun, it gives you kind of a little glimpse into some of the different things that are on her plate. So one of my other pieces of advice is find people who you think are doing interesting things in your life and ask them how they got there or what path they took to get there. So that leads us to the topic of collaboration. As a horn player, I can sit in my room and play the horn all day by myself, but it's not nearly as much fun as playing with other people. So if you're a pianist or a guitar player or a harp player and you're interested in presenting solo performances exclusively, then that's really excellent. But most of us need and thrive on working with other people. So how do we go out and find folks whose musical and artistic interests align with ours? Because they are out there, but how do you find them in a whole sea full of people? I would start by explore all the options that seem interesting to you. Under non-pandemic circumstances, I would have said, go out and hear lots of music, lots of live music in lots of different venues. During the pandemic, I would actually say, in some ways, there are great benefits here. You can hop on the internet and you can watch part of a performance, or you can see a little bit of this, or you can go look at some of that and see what might be interesting to you, and keep track of who those artists are, what those kind of projects are that seem really interesting to you, and why you find them really compelling. You might be able to engage in some of that yourself, whether you immediately think of it that way or not. It's certainly been that way for me. So how do you find people to work with? Some of those folks are easily accessible. Some of the folks that you can hear and see are people who have availability and ways to reach them. And I would say have courage. Get in touch with them, start a conversation. It would be better if the conversation doesn't start with, I think you're so great, I love your work. It would be better if the conversation includes some thoughtful responses to the work they're doing, some questions about the work they've chosen to do, the things they're choosing to present, how they got to be where they are. If you approach it with genuine interest, the chances are really good, or better anyway, that folks will want to engage with you. And the other thing I would say is have patience, because not every conversation is the one that's going to lead to your next big project with your dream collaborator. Sometimes it's a matter of planting seeds and waiting over time. And sometimes the seeds don't grow where or when you think they're going to. Sometimes you plant them over here and the flowers come up over here. So sometimes they're not even the flowers you thought you planted. But it's pretty cool how that works, which is great. The other thing I would say is that you folks are all tough students, and so you will graduate here with degrees from Tufts, but you will also have picked up an awful lot of skills along the way. Writing skills, critical thinking skills, creative thinking skills, time management skills, some things that are going to be really useful in crafting your musical life, whatever that's going to look like. So have faith in that too. Social media can be a great way to help you find collaborators. You can look for folks that way, but you can also ask questions of the universe. Who do I know who plays oboe and recorder and might want to work on an underwater piece? No, not if you're an oboe player. Anyway, the other thing is ask your non-musician friends also who they think are cool, who they might think of you as collaborating with, or if you're on the hunt for a particular person to fill a particular void in your artistic life. Some of my non-music friends are actually really great musical resources because you'd be surprised who people know. Just having a conversation can be really, really helpful. The other thing is you don't have to start out with a fully formed dream, a giant plan. You don't have to make a lifelong commitment to any particular collaborator or collaborators. And you certainly don't have to sell it that way when you're working with folks. So you can start small. You can say, let's get together and read some duets. Let's work on a small project for this particular art festival. And if it goes well, you can invest more fully. And if it's not really a great fit, then you learn some really great stuff along the way about yourself, about other people, about making art in the world. So you don't have to go into this with some kind of giant dream or lifelong agreement. One of my favorite collaborators and somebody I feel really lucky to have gotten to work with is a dancer and choreographer whose name is Krolak. And this is one of those kind of stories. So Karen is the artistic director for a modern dance troupe called Monkey House. And I think they even think of themselves as larger than just modern dance troupe. There's educational components, there's choreography components. But I met Karen at a show I went to once. I was looking for something to do, and it sounded interesting in like 2003, 2004. And there was free ice cream after the show. I recommend free ice cream. So we stuck around, and I had a great conversation with Karen and also with her partner who was the lighting designer. And they didn't live in Boston at the time, but were planning to come to Boston later, and just in having an engaging conversation about the work they had done that night. And I had no aspirations to work with a dancer. It just, there was free ice cream, and we were standing there talking. So we exchanged contact information, and I didn't really think anything of it. And a while later, when they moved to Boston, they got in touch and said, well, we're here, and we're new, and want to go out for lunch. So that started a really great set of conversations and just interest in each other's work. So then another acquaintance of mine organized a series of cabaret performances at the Oberon Theater in Harvard Square, and they were called Bent Wit Cabaret, and it was more of a not a classical music scene, not really a rock and roll scene, kind of an alternative creative music kind of scene where I didn't feel like I fit in, because up until that point I had done largely very straight up classical chamber music and orchestral playing. But I really wanted to perform on one of these cabaret shows, and I didn't think that dragging out arrangements of Bach cello suites for horn was going to be the right answer. So I thought about who do I know that I could perform with, that would kind of tie pieces together and help hook me into this community a little bit better. And Karen immediately came to mind because she's always been interested in things that build bridges between different people and different communities. And so we ended up performing a piece together on one of those cabaret performances called The Dream of the Rhinoceros by a Norwegian composer. And we had a costume, and I was the front of the rhinoceros, and Karen was the back, and she did a beautiful modern dance, and it went over really well, and we had a good time working together. So then we started a series of just improvisation rehearsals. I don't know, we would get together and work on things, and we came from such different angles, but also we each had curiosity and interest in each other's work. So that led to performing together at first night a couple of times, and it actually led to a fully formed concept recital here on this stage about music and movement that included Karen and another dancer and myself and one or two other musicians, but kind of a small team, all the different ways you could kind of put music and movement together. And that's been one of the most fruitful artistic collaborations of my life, and it happened because I stopped and had a conversation with a dancer after a show about, things that were interesting in that show with her. So this is kind of what I mean by, if you put yourself out there and you're willing to engage deeply with people, seeds will get planted and things will grow, and you may not know where they're going to go, but if you're open to that possibility, then you can add that into your interesting repertoire of performances. I am a big fan of small ensemble playing. I do a lot of chamber music playing. I do a reasonable amount of orchestral playing too, and I love that also. But there are some real advantages to working in small ensembles, whether you're a brass player, a wind player, a vocalist, a string player, a pianist. And here are some of the things that are great advantages about that. Number one, portability. You can put you all in one car and go somewhere. It doesn't take an act of Congress to get the group to go from one place to another or for things to happen that way. On the same theme, number two, rehearsal space. You don't need a giant place to rehearse, at least not when you don't have to be, 10 feet apart from each other in your performance venue. But even then, during the pandemic, the ensembles that I work with that have done the most have actually been the small ensembles, because we can fit ourselves in a big space and be safe about it. Number three, performance space, too, just like rehearsal space. You don't need a giant place to be. You can also consider an awful lot of non-traditional performance space options. So I've played in art galleries, I've played in coffee shops, I've played in libraries are great places. A lot of them have small stages, small auditoriums that are really great places to play. You can play in a bandstand on the town green. You can, as long as the weather is conducive, the climate in the building is conducive to your instrument or your voice, you can perform there and you don't need a whole lot of square footage. It's also a much more intimate, a much more close relationship with the audience. So even if there are only 15 people in the audience, you feel really connected to them because physically you're close and acoustically you're close, which is really great. If you're trying to do it professionally, or even if you're just trying to cover your expenses, you need less funding. If there are only 4 or 5 of you in the ensemble, it's a lot easier to raise money for that than for a 50-piece orchestra or a large chorus. So that's also an advantage. You have the ability also to shape your own creative work. So when I play for orchestras, it's wonderful. It's this big, massive sound and a big crowd, and I really love that sensation, but I don't get to choose what I'm playing. There are limits to what I get to choose in terms of the interpretation that I'm offering. It is like being on a big team, which is really great, but I don't get to drive the programming, I don't get to drive the priorities of the ensemble. So that's one thing that I think is really great about small ensembles, and that I think when you're talking about a meaningful, multifaceted musical life, can be really meaningful to be able to select the repertoire and the situations. Nimbleness is also a great advantage of smaller ensembles. One of the groups I play with is the Juventus New Music Ensemble, and as soon as things shut down for the pandemic, the artistic director of that ensemble said, well, if we can't do concerts where people come to us, we're going to bring the concerts to the people. And pretty much immediately he set up a series of concerts called Stay at Home with Juventus, and every Wednesday night, one member of the ensemble performed a mini recital from their own home, just their living rooms or their studios or whatever the situation might be. And that's not something that you can do quite as easily with a large ensemble. There's often a lot more structure you have to work within. So the ability to quickly take advantage of opportunities and be nimble is pretty great. And along those lines, you can try something once. You can decide you're gonna put on a certain kind of performance or do a certain kind of event or activity. And if it doesn't work, you can move on to something else again fairly quickly, because you didn't have to figure out all the logistics for a really large group and make a much bigger commitment to that. So I think that's also a really great advantage of small ensembles. It's true that there are some downsides to playing in small ensembles. The biggest one of those is that you don't have a large established infrastructure. There isn't a team of people whose purpose it is within the organization just to make sure things happen the way they're supposed to, and that there is programming and that there are places to perform. So one of the things about playing in small ensembles is somebody has to do that work, and it often ends up being responsibility of the performers. Now, I enjoy that myself. I enjoy doing that work, so that's an easy fit for me. It's not always the case for everybody. The other thing is that musically I can be much more intimately involved in a small ensemble, but you never have that sensation of having like a 20-person brass ensemble playing some kind of, playing a giant thing. If you're singing in a vocal quartet, you'll never have the feeling of a giant ensemble around you, like that wash of sound that just goes over you and is exhilarating and amazing. So it's actually why I do both, because I find that having that balance of kinds of experiences is really nourishing for me. So again, it's a lot about what is interesting to you. When you're talking about small ensembles, there are basically two ways to set them up. One is a democratic structure. The other is to have an ensemble director. So if you're operating with a democratic structure, everybody has equal responsibility in making sure that whatever you're doing is at a high level, all the boxes are ticked, that you've got everything under control, and everyone in the ensemble typically participates in non-musical ways. So the best way to do that is up front to determine what those isolated parts of work are going to be, and assign them to people so that expectations are clear up front. So whether you're forming an ensemble newly or whether you're joining an established ensemble, understanding who exactly does what, who checks the email, who books venues if that's what you're doing, who's in charge of publicity, who takes care of your finances and payroll and things like that. Those might not be big jobs depending on the person. Oh, who keeps the library? That's really important. And every ensemble is going to be different. You're going to have different situations and structure. It doesn't have to be even. There might be people in an ensemble who have more non-musical responsibilities than other people. But as long as a group, you've agreed that that's how you want to operate, that's fine. There's nothing wrong with that. And that might have to do with who has more extra musical commitments that they need to take care of, who has certain skill sets or doesn't have certain skill sets. So there could be lots of reasons why that happens. In a democratic situation, sometimes we're in the position of having to hold each other accountable for the work we've said we're going to do. That's not also so much fun all the time, and we'll talk about communication in a little bit. With an ensemble director kind of model, you have one person who you could call artistic director, or there's lots of different titles, but somebody who kind of steers the ship and keeps everything going forward. It doesn't mean the other folks aren't necessarily going to be involved. Again, there's different ways to set this up. It could be just that the artistic director does most of the things and gets input from everybody else. It could be that other people have smaller jobs or smaller components to that work. Again, as long as the expectations are clear and everybody in the group has the same expectations of the situation, and you understand what you're agreeing to when you get into it, that's going to make any musical situation all that much more rewarding, because you don't have to worry about all the other stuff. You can just sit down and do your thing. You can play, you can sing, you can make the music that you're there to make. As a side note, if you're forming an ensemble from scratch, And if it is the kind of ensemble that you hope will have a significant artistic presence in the world, or that will be a money-making ensemble, I recommend that you consider having a board. You can call them a board of trustees, you can call them, there's lots of things you can call them, but some variety of board. When you incorporate as a nonprofit organization in the Commonwealth of Massachusetts, you have to have a board of directors. They can be members of the ensemble, so you don't technically have to bring in anybody from the outside. But if you do bring in people from the outside, you can get support, you can get good ideas, you can sometimes have a reality check. Are we doing things that are going to be reasonable or interesting or that align with the vision we set out for ourselves? It is true that you have to invest some time and energy into a board, so having extra meetings, making sure the communication is good about who is doing what that way. But I find that in general it's worth it. So the other thing is that board members don't have to be particularly wealthy people, particularly well-connected people. They don't have to be, they can be your friends and family, and sometimes that gets overlooked, and sometimes people think it's they need to be reaching way outside their friend group to find board members, but the reality is sometimes those are the people who care about us the most and support us the most, and if their vision aligns with ours, it can be really beneficial, and they may have connections to other audience members, to rehearsal spaces, to things like that can be really beneficial to the organization. So if you have the opportunity, give it a try, have a board. If the point of having an ensemble for you is getting together with some folks and making some music for yourselves kind of on your own terms, definitely not necessary. Okay, so you found your people, you found your collaborators, now what? This is going to sound kind of obvious, but treat each other well. It's really important. So good, clear, honest, kind communication is really important. And if all that is under control, then the music making, then there isn't anything to get in the way of the music making. So whether it's written communication or spoken communication or nonverbal communication, I don't just mean body language, but I also mean like in your actual performances and rehearsals. Think about how you would want someone to talk to you. Because it certainly can be frustrating. If somebody's not pulling their weight in the ensemble, then it's something that needs to be addressed, and the sooner the better, to be quite honest, even though that's a little scary and difficult. My personal advice on this subject is be straightforward, but be kind about it, and keep a sense of empathy about you, because it could be you next time, you never know. But also because we don't always know the situation that's going on. So in terms of rehearsal communication, I like to set up expectations in advance and just think about the tone of the words that I'm using to other people, and the fact that I may need to kind of meet them in the middle of, if that person is dragging all the time, and I know that person is dragging all the time, and I'm sure that person is dragging all the time, I'm still going to be aware of how I try to approach that, because maybe I'm rushing all the time. Sometimes it happens. But also, it's investment in your ensemble and in your community. So an ensemble can be like family. They can be some really rewarding and deep friendships. They certainly don't have to be. There are professional chamber ensembles active currently where members of the groups don't talk to each other, but they manage to make really beautiful music together. I think that's a really excellent thing for them. I wouldn't find it very rewarding personally, so, and I'm not even sure how it works, to be honest. So if you can create a culture of kind honesty and clear expectations with your colleagues, everything is going to go better. Even if the conversation has to be, I signed up to do this because I was really excited about it and I thought it was going to be a certain way, but it's not, then that's fine. You can move on from there. So you've got your group, you've got your communication. Then we want to talk about rehearsals and rehearsal expectations. I like to build rehearsal expectations in advance for folks, for my groups. And it can be really simple. It can just be like, hey, we're all going to agree to be on time. we're not going to talk over each other. It can also be really specific. Which pieces are we going to perform, or are we going to work on rehearsing on which day and in which order? How are we going to rehearse today? Do we just want to read through all the material we've got and see what's here? Do we want to pick a piece and really dig in on it deeply? Like, what's the point of this? I've learned a lot about rehearsing over the years from specific individuals and groups I've worked with, and one of the most interesting things was a clarinet player that I worked with once who loved to get the group together and to listen to recordings as a group and talk about what we liked about them and what we didn't, and what we might want to do ourselves as we are going forward. I play with somebody right now who loves to record our own rehearsals and listen back to them as a group and talk about what we could do better as a group, and so that's also another avenue available to you. I'm also a big fan of having business meetings that are separate from rehearsals, so that you don't have to be bogged down with the details of how you're running the ensemble at the same time you're trying to actually make the music and have the passion and do the thing that you're there to do. And that I've found to be really effective too. So building trust between members of an ensemble takes a lot of time and a lot of effort, but it's really worth it for sure. And it helps build sustainability. So kind of as just a side note, from my perspective, playing chamber music has really built up my confidence about performing, and it bleeds over into all aspects of my life, whether it's improvising or whether it's playing in an orchestral context, because you're working with the same people in a small group over time, and you get to know each other really well, and if you trust those people's feedback, whether that's artistic or personal, then you build a framework for understanding, even though I feel like I didn't do a very good job, everybody's telling me I did a good job, or I didn't notice I was really low energy today, but I was really low energy today, and it was nice to have somebody I trust be able to tell me that, and so you don't end up second guessing yourself quite so much, which is really nice. Inevitably, when we're working in small ensembles, we come to a time where we have to replace an ensemble member, and there are different ways to go about doing that, similar to how do you find ways to find collaborators and build up your ensemble. And there isn't one answer for that necessarily. So a couple of common ways are to hold auditions, and they could be very formal auditions where everybody has to play the same music, and you could even put up a screen if you want to do it that way. Or you can have slightly more casual auditions, invite folks to bring what they want to play. And another option is to just invite different people to come and sit in with you and work with them for a little while and see what that's like, because then you get a sense of what they're like as not just musicians too. They're not just performers. If you're going to hold auditions, you have the choice to advertise that you're going to hold auditions, or to do them just by invitation. And if you're in a city like Boston, which is full of really great and enthusiastic musicians, you can be prepared to get a lot of response, a lot of interest in your auditions, and figure out how to narrow that down. Even if what you're looking for is somebody to play string quartets with every Sunday afternoon in somebody's living room, like it's. There are a lot of great players around here. It's a little bit of a different situation if you're in a different town. And to think about who are the folks that you really want to be working with long term, not just who's the best performer, but who also has great interpersonal skills and maybe brings other things to your ensemble, a certain creativity or certain non-musical skills that are going to be a really great fit. So you've got your people, you've got your plan. In order for it to be a sustainable situation, whatever you end up doing with your musical lives after school, you have to practice. You've been hearing that since you were little, right? Everybody has to practice. Where are you going to practice? You can certainly practice in your room. You can practice in someone else's room. Then we start having to get a little bit more creative, especially if you're living in a situation where practicing in your space isn't really conducive, or you're working a job that means you come back late at night and there isn't good time to practice. So I would encourage folks to think about creative and interesting alternatives. Basements can be good places to practice. Attics can be good places to practice. You have to be careful though. There can be mold, there can be dust, there can be fumes, there can be things that are unhealthy. So you want to check that out really carefully. But you might be able to use like a local facility. You might be able to use a church, you might be able to use a synagogue, you might be able to use a community space. More of those kind of spaces are charging folks to use parts of their space these days, especially if you're actually trying to hold a rehearsal there as opposed to just go over and practice yourself. And so again, I encourage folks to think creatively. Like, you can barter for space. You can offer to play at events or at services. You can offer to give lessons to folks from the community, even if you're not doing this as your profession, but as an avocation. That shouldn't stop you from feeling like you have some bargaining power in that conversation. So same with rehearsal space. Creative thinking is really useful. You know, garages have been used for a long time for rehearsals. One of the groups that I play with, Rehearsal Ensemble, back much earlier, this is our 20th anniversary season this year, and much earlier on, like maybe our 5th season, we used to rehearse in a conference room, an unused conference room in a office building that where one of our members worked during the day, and that member is Ironic Gozi, and he was one of the founders of Harmonix, which is the video game company that has come up with several very popular music video games. You know, when they started with their space, like they were really only using half the office space, so we were able to rehearse in the other half of the space, even sometimes during the day. So before they made Rock Band, but after that we couldn't rehearse there anymore. One of the other things is you don't actually have to be physically present in the same space to rehearse together. So there is a string quartet called the Bayberry String Quartet that has group members everywhere, and they've been rehearsing virtually for a really long time, long before the pandemic hit, although since then they have put together some really nice documentation about how they do that. So they use BandLab, and they record themselves. It's an audio recording app, essentially, that you use through a browser. And if you go to their website, which is bayberrystringquartet.com, they've got some really good PDF tutorials on how to use the software to rehearse most effectively. So that's actually been kind of fun to explore since we're in this pandemic mode. But there are ways to do that don't involve being in the same place at the same time. Okay, next on the list is sustainability, right? So this is your life, and this is your music making adventure, and we don't want everybody to burn out really fast. So how do we keep it sustainable? There are lots of opportunities out there we can take advantage of. There's lots of opportunities we can craft. It involves putting a serious amount of effort in. So I'm going to start with success, an interesting word. I'm going to encourage folks to define success for yourself. So figure out what is your goal and how are you going to get there? What does that look like for you? It does not have to be the same thing for everybody. And it's really easy for us all to measure ourselves against somebody else's yardsticks, to say, like, because I didn't win a job in the Boston Symphony, I'm not a success. Or because our string quartet only plays in non-traditional venues, then we are not a success. So there's no right way and there's no wrong way to have musical performance in your life. And if it makes you happy and it's bringing you fulfillment, that's the right way. Other people will have opinions, and you can just not worry about their opinions. But knowing what your own goals are is really, really helpful. And if you don't know what your own goals are, or you don't know what defines success for yourself, it's okay too. You can kind of figure it out as you go. Just take the time to reflect after you've done something and see if that feels like it's good for you. Balance. So making sure there's a nice balance in your life between music and other things. Other things is a big pot. That could be jobs, that could be relationships, that could be family, that could be physical activity, that could be a whole host of kinds of things. And you'll figure out how much music you need to have in your life to feed your soul that way. And life does get out of balance often, frankly. But there's a difference between it getting out of balance temporarily, 2 days, 6 weeks, 6 months, and getting out of balance really permanently. And that's when it's worth taking a step back and taking a look and reevaluating and saying, is this project too much? Do I need another project? Do I not have enough performing in my life? Is the performing I'm doing not really bringing me joy? Because it's a lot of effort, it's a lot of energy, and it needs to be bringing you joy. Good general health, super important. Not something anybody really talked to me about as a young person. I think there's a lot more about that out now, which is great. Making sure you're getting some kind of aerobic activity, because all the oxygen coursing through our bodies takes care of a whole lot of things, faster recovery time for all sorts of things, and just generally keeps everybody in good health. It's also great for stress relief. Core strength is super important. So whatever kind of performing you're doing, singing, brass playing, string playing, wind playing, keyboard playing, non-Western instrument playing, it's all very physical activity. And core strength is going to help all of us to keep things well in order. Making sure you're getting enough sleep, it's hard to do, it's really important. I have this joke that I always tell my students, which is that the most important thing I learned in graduate school is that I play the horn better on a full night's sleep. And it's not really a joke, it's actually really true, because when I was an undergrad at Oberlin and I was doing 2 degrees at once, there wasn't nearly as much sleep as there should have been. But I really do everything better when I've had enough sleep. My brain functions better, my body functions better. It's not always possible, but it's really important. And having good mental health is also really important. So I'm glad that there is much more access to good mental health services these days. And we all need some help and some support at some points in our life. It doesn't even have to be a drastic situation, but taking care that your emotions and your brain are in balance is really important too. Chance. Yeah, there is a significant element of chance and luck in some of these experiences. So being in the right place at the right time. Some places that you might end up living have more access to more musical opportunities than others. And if you want more musical opportunities and you're in that situation, then you have to figure out how to build them. And even then, there's still some chance involved. But being ready and being able to take advantages of opportunities when they come by is also really helpful anyway. It's not something we can control necessarily, but it's really helpful. The other thing that's on my list is being willing to say yes and then learn how to do things sometimes. So it could be scary, but deciding that you're going to take that jazz gig when you're not a jazz player and then figure out what it is you need to do. It can, it can be work, but it can also be really invigorating, and it can really be exciting to work on something new and can open a lot of doors. Having quality personal relationships, so keeping close to people who get you. We aren't lucky enough to be able to choose all the people in our lives and to always choose the ones who are going to be the most nurturing for us and the most encouraging for us. So when you find folks who support you and nurture you and can really be there for you and understand your crazy, weird ocarina passions, then those are the people to really hold on to. And it's reciprocal too. So when other people find us and we can provide those things for other people, that's a thing that's going to make a meaningful musical life really sustainable for folks. I mean, it's going to make all of life sustainable. So also, many people have found satisfaction in their musical lives in combining their interests. I have a degree in environmental studies and a degree in horn playing. I've played one concert in one forest once. Oh, actually this summer I did a bunch of outdoor concerts because I couldn't play indoors. But some combinations are not necessarily possible or obvious, but I can think of some folks in the area who have done some really interesting things. Stephen Karadianis is a prominent orchestra conductor, and he's also a classical music DJ. He has had a real strong interest in radio journalism for a long time, and so he's been able to put that together that way. I have a colleague whose name is Dave Jamrog, who is a drummer and also an audio and video recording and productions person. And so he is able to put those things together. I know someone who went to school for composition and is a really great composer and decided that the way he wanted to work that was to work in IT during the day. And he's part of a very strong faith community, and he composes music all the time for use in that particular faith community and for those folks to play. So he's writing tons of music, he's having it performed all the time, he's getting the level of recognition that is comfortable for him, and it's also very personally meaningful for him. So that's one example. I have an acquaintance who is a middle school band director, but also hosts virtual video game competitions. And some of what he's been able to do with that, he's been able to do because of some of his musical experiences and because of like sound engineering work that he did also. So there are lots of ways to put these things together. You all probably know people who have interesting and varied musical lives and who organize the balance different ways. And if you're curious, seek them out and ask them how they got where they are and what parts of it feed their souls and what parts of it less so. One other note is about competition. So it can be really easy to feel like this other ensemble is trying to do the same thing we're doing and we are in competition with them, or this other person is going after the same goals I am locally and they're my competition. So Oliver Kaplan, who is a composer who just lives over the hill in Medford and is the artistic director of Juventus Ensemble, says, our competition is Netflix. Our competition is not other musicians. So this idea of creating a culture of abundance, there is enough music to go around for all of us. There's enough musical interest to go around for all of us. There are enough audience members, even if you're looking at it professionally, to go around for all of us. Sometimes you just have to get a little bit creative. It's to all of our benefit to support other ensembles and other performers, to learn from them, to engage with them, to work on projects together, because it just disseminates everything even more widely. And if you can have a great time doing it too. So thinking about it as abundance versus scarcity. Okay, so that is largely what I have to say about crafting a meaningful and sustainable musical life after school. It is absolutely possible to do all of that. It takes some creativity, it takes some dedication, and with good collaborators and a supply of internal energy and enthusiasm, it can be incredibly rewarding. I personally think there's a lot of possibility in small ensembles, and like I said at the beginning of the presentation, if folks have specific questions or concerns, I'm happy to address them. You can communicate with me, Anne Howarth, through the music department office here at Tufts, and they will funnel questions or responses to me. Just in closing, we all know that music making can bring great joy. That's why we're all here. It's how we got involved in the music department at Tufts, and I want for all of you that you can have that gift in your life forever. So thank you very much for tuning in this evening. And hopefully we'll get to meet in person someday.